This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 165. Preparing for an Entrepreneurial Britain.
So if the UK is going to prosper after Brexit, it needs to get its mojo back. It needs to be more entrepreneurial. And we're going to talk about that today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. Yes, the UK needs to lead trade, not scrape around looking for trade deals that'll probably mean more for the other side than it does for the UK. In short, whilst we prepare for Boris's no-deal Brexit, should we also make entrepreneurship and innovation a big deal for Britain? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. Well, Britain gave us the steam engine, railways, the electric motor, the jet engine, stainless steel, canned food, frozen food, the telegraph, chocolate bars, the fire extinguisher, the ATM, the World Wide Web, the lawnmower, the light bulb, the kettle, bikes, colour photography, the match, vaccines, caterpillar tracks, the tank, the cloned sheep, the bra, rocket fuel, the toaster, the radio telescope, the ballpoint pen, suntan lotion, scotch tape, aerosol, the wheelchair. But what has it done lately? Perhaps it's not been doing a lot because we are hamstrung by Brussels. And that's all going to change once Britain is out of the EU, once we've left that free trade agreement with the 27 nations of the European Union and the other 40 countries that the EU has free trade agreements with. It's all going to be so good then. Just imagine the reason that Britain only exports $400 billion worth of goods is because we are shackled by Europe, even though, of course, the US only exports $1.2 trillion worth of goods, 3 times the amount the UK exports, but they've got 5 times the population. And they are unhindered by the EU. But let's ignore those facts and just concentrate on the opportunity for Britain. The big stuff we export. Transport, like cars and machines and gas turbines and the like, and chemical products like medicines and oil and a bit of gold. That's I've just outlined 3/4 of our exports right there. So how do we export more, Steve? Obviously a lower power might be a good start, but do we produce more of what we're producing right now? Or do we need this new entrepreneurial Britain that's going to create new stuff? And how do we get there?
Well, this is actually Mariana Mazzucato's major point, that entrepreneurship and innovation is what you need to inspire. And one element that can do that is the government sector. Financing, and because it can afford to lose money, whereas the private sector, you have to have very wealthy individuals to be able to afford money, to lose money, to actually have innovation take place, because most innovations fail, but the ones that succeed wildly. So there's a whole world. How do you generate that focus? And the trouble is with Britain, that it made the decision under Maggie Thatcher back in the 1980s to go with a service-led economy. They mentioned such a thing as a post-industrial world. You didn't need the industrial sector. You could make the money up by service exports. And if you look at, actually, I'm going to check. Were you looking at the Atlas of Economic Complexity as you gave those?
Yeah. With a lot of information.
Okay.
So are you going to do that while you're looking that up?
No, don't. It's already in front of me, mate.
Okay. Because the question I was going to ask was, for all of this, has our membership of the EU made the UK too concentrated? I mean, is that idea that, we're going to concentrate on the service sector, we're going to be the financial centre for Europe? Has that, has the EU taken us down the road of comparative advantage, that very ugly road? And is that part of your argument of why you think we should be out?
I think this is part of it, because if you look at it wasn't just the EU. I mean, this is Maggie Thatcher made 2 decisions. One was to promote the financial sector, to remove government regulations, but almost without fail, those regulations were about what happens in the financial sector, not what happens in the industrial sector of the economy. So basically, why do we have those regulations? Because back in the 1930s, we had a thing called the Great Depression, caused by banks behaving irresponsibly. A whole lot of legislation got put in place to stop that happening again. And then the deregulationists go and remove it once more, and we get back into another huge debt bubble. So but there's the EU at the same time. If you look at what, this is where it's great to make a comparison of the UK to Germany. I'm looking at the UK's chart as you are right now, and information and computer technology is 21% of exports. Insurance and finance is 13%. You've got pretty much 40% there. Add in transport, which itself travel and tourism and in transport, you've got virtually 50% of the economy in the service sector. Now, if you take a look at, let's actually both do that. I'm going to bring up another tab.
I think it's more than 50%, isn't it, the service sector in total? But yeah.
We're on 33, it's about 43, 44%. There are cars there as well.
In manufacturing.
If you look at Germany, then Germany as an export, I'm waiting for the data to pop up here. Come on, looking at a blank screen. Thanks very much, guys.
I love this. It's almost like real-time radio, isn't it?
Real-time stuff.
But it's just podcasting that we can't bother editing, so we just leave it in. Well, let's just sit around and wait for it. But I mean, Germany. But we know Germany has a far more. I mean, the basis of it. We know that Germany has a far bigger manufacturing export base than we do.
And when you look at the percentage of GDP that is generated by the manufacturing sector, back when Maggie made that decision, manufacturing in the UK was about 20% of GDP, and it was the same in Germany. You fast forward to now, it's 10% in the UK and still 20%.
And obviously, we can't have everyone working in the finance sector. So even though
people are selling debt,
yeah.
And that's the trouble. It only worked as long as there's a debt bubble going on. That's what Maggie wasn't aware of. So when the debt bubble banged out, the growth in the finance sector stops. It still takes up a huge percentage of GDP, but your GDP is growing more sluggishly. So you've got to go back to what you rejected back in the 1980s, which is manufacturing.
Right. And should the focus there be trying to create an export base for that, so you get a higher proportion of GDP from exports? Or can we look at places like America, for example, which has a sort of it does have a manufacturing base, but they've also got a huge deficit, and they sort of seem to be doing all right, don't they, by nature of their sheer size?
Well, they've also got the fact that they're the reserve currency, which makes life rather easy for them. They can't, the American dollars are always going to be in demand, and you can buy anything with American dollars. With UK pounds, you've got to convert them to American dollars to finalise those purchases. So if you're running a trade deficit, as the UK is doing, then you're in trouble.
Right.
So what you have with the UK is, it's first of all got an overvalued pound compared to what the manufacturing sector needs, because the service sector, even though it's been ineffective in replacing manufacturing exports, is still huge. So you've got, I think, on the order of 40% of exports from the service sector.
Right. But you're saying there's the service sector is a bad thing. You seem to be tying the service sector with the finance sector. I mean, they don't have to be the same thing, do they? So you look at companies like Microsoft.
They are. I mean,
well,
add up all the hairdressers in the country. I mean, partly.
Well, no, but if you look at is Google a manufacturing base? It's a service.
It's an ICT. That's fair enough. Okay, but
yeah. So I mean, that has to be the growth area, doesn't it? But if you're that raises the question: if you're going to develop exports, do you try and expand the industries you already have, or do you try and launch new high-tech industries from scratch? And logic tells.
That's again
logic says you try and build on what you've got, like cars, and like for example, can we make better electric cars than the Germans do? But you also look at the growth around the world, and it's all high-tech, isn't it?
Yeah, and that is partly what also the Atlas of Economic Complexity, which you said, let's plug it because it is a fabulous resource. It's a database developed by computer scientists, not by economists. Therefore, it's already offered a good start, and it takes the Standard International Trade Classification System (SITC) and has data going back about something like 30 or 40 years of every country in the world down to, I think, a 6-digit level in terms of the accuracy of how they classify different industries. And that shows you not just what are the exports of a particular country and what the imports are by sector. It also lets them build up a map of saying, using algorithms to mathematically say how distant is one industry from another. So they have clusters of industry. Obviously, for example, oil, coal, all this sort of stuff goes in the resource sector. Cars, trains goes in the manufacturing sector. But glass, for example, is closely related to cars and trains because you have to have windows on them. Therefore, these two industries are not particularly far apart. And what they say is, in terms of looking at how countries succeed in developing, it tends to be by taking industries that are already close to what you've currently got and creating a new industry out of the combination of old ones. That's where the innovation tends to occur. So they advise you to, as you say, build on what you currently have. But of course, in the UK's case, that has been dramatically converted from from what used to be a strong manufacturing sector and one that now is quite weak. But a major part of that, getting over that weakness, is a devaluation in the pound. And that's certainly been happening.
Obviously, that's good because that makes it cheaper for us to export stuff. But then if we're not making all the stuff in this country, then it's more expensive because we've got to import all those parts, which are going to cost more.
And you've got to basically start building your own machine tool systems. This is the part that Germany has.
Well, we've got actually a lot of machines are made in Britain. We do have that advantage. We actually tool up Europe to a reasonable extent. So we do have that on our side, I think.
But not as much as Germany, I would say.
No, of course not. Yeah.
We're looking at look at the section with the manufacturing section for the machines in general, in terms of proportion of UK trade, are about 40%, about 60% what they are in Germany. So the tool sector and of course the technical training that goes with it, that's vital. So I've seen some comments in the UK media about promoting trade education. I think that's an excellent idea. It's one thing that all this focus on universities, which really do not provide the skill set people need in manufacturing as skilled workers, nothing like it. That's good to see at least some emphasis going back on trade.
Well, that's it. It's how do you make companies go, irrespective of, I mean, you'd assume that companies would naturally look for the opportunities that exist based on what's already around. I mean, we don't want to get to a stage, do we, where governments determine what industries are going to be developed in the country. It's got to somehow be something that happens by
you need a mix between the two. And I like combining the work of Mariana Mazzucato at one stage, talking about the role of the government in sponsoring innovation. And she points out that even companies like Google rely upon an enormous amount of government-developed technology. So the government plays a role there. The other side is Bill Janeway, who's a successful venture capitalist who also has a PhD in economics from Cambridge, back when Cambridge was a non-orthodox institution. So he's a follower of Joan Robinson and Nikki Caldor and people like that. And he argues that innovation occurs in the private sector because of the promise of outrageous gain. He was one of the early investors in Compaq, for example. Now, Compaq has gone by the way of the dodo, but for a while that was one of the world's major computer manufacturers, and he made a large amount of money out of that. And what he sees is venture capitalism works because people have huge amounts of money and they can afford to risk part of it, losing money in most, but making an outrageous gain in one or the other. Right. And so the combination of the two is what you need. Now, in many ways,
they're the people providing the money. They're not the people providing the ideas, though, are they? So if you look at, I mean, all that's saying is that needs to be money available for those people who've got the idea. If you look at the real entrepreneurs, I don't think Bill Gates was in it for money, was he? He was in it out of intellectual satisfaction. I don't think he was, when he started in his garage, he wasn't expecting to build the biggest company in the world.
No, but he was always money oriented, no doubt about that. And he made his money by some. I won't go into that, but I wasn't particularly impressed with the way he made his money initially. But you have to have finance to enable entrepreneurs to turn good ideas into good products.
Yeah,
and that's why we come back to how do you do that? And like there's talk about an investment bank in the UK, and I think it's a good idea to do it, but it has to be something which is willing to lose money. And this is the ironic thing: people think things like this should make money. No, the whole idea of this is to have something which can afford to have losses, so that out of some of those losses occur some outrageous gains. And in the aggregate, the whole thing might lose money as a way of providing government finance to enable entrepreneurial activity to occur. But the entrepreneurial activity is more important than whether the government makes a profit or a loss out of that institution.
Well, James Dyson, who obviously invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner, his G-Force floor cleaner, he made 5,000 prototypes of those before he could sell any of them. And I think he didn't come from a poor background himself, but basically he needed his wife's salary to fund all these prototypes. I don't think he was getting money from elsewhere. So if his wife hadn't been on a good wicket, then James Dyson's career wouldn't have been successful. You just wonder how many other people like that have great ideas, can't commercialize them because they can't run those prototypes because they can't get the funding to make it happen.
And this is actually, if you go back to the Industrial Revolution itself, you find a similar story there. I would like it to be the case that the credit system provided the money for entrepreneurs. But when you take a look at it, now they haven't done the historical work. I'm actually trying to find some of the papers that I was sent on this topic by some economic historians. When you look back at James Watt, you look back at the invention of the spinning jenny, all these original inventions, they didn't have government money to come up with the idea. What they tended to do was pool from what a friend of mine calls the bank of FFF, family, friends, and fools. And so, look, I've got this great idea. I'm literally caught up there myself right now, as you know. I've got this great idea. I want to commercialize it, but I can't get any money to commercialize it. Can I borrow some money from you? Do you have any money you don't need at the moment? And okay, with some cash gets put across, and then when it succeeds, then the banks throw money at it. Now you need to reverse it. You need to get.
And when it doesn't succeed, which would be more than 50% of the time, then you lose all your family and friends. And
that's right.
You're
Yeah,
penniless.
it makes for great socialists. But no wonder the Scots are so sour.
And I think there's lots of other reasons for that. But the answer from the government very often is, we'll just create less red tape. That's all business needs.
No, it's got to be it's not red tape. It's green paper.
Yeah.
You need the other. You need to have the government being willing to sponsor stuff which is going to fail, and you need to have people saying the fact that this thing runs at a loss is not a problem for the government because the government can afford that loss. And these are the sorts of ways I'd like to see government spending run, not as sending out bureaucrats to control the marking of university lecturers. Not that I have any personal experience of that.
Right, might be going off a tangent here, I suspect.
But
yeah, using government money as an investment tool for high risk that they would otherwise not be able to get access to.
People the fact that this thing is going to lose money because it's actually the businesses we want to spin off that are the important thing, not whether it makes a profit or not.
So there's another angle here as well, isn't there? Which is that whole entrepreneurial mindset. Is that there anyway, or does it need to be? Do we need it as part of the education at school, or do entrepreneurs exist anyway, and we can spend too much time trying to recreate history to try and create more Dysons in the UK?
I don't think you can actually teach entrepreneurship in that sense, though I know the courses like that exist. I think what you have is an environment where it's not discouraged and not penalised, and that is one case where Americans do make the case that you're allowed to fail in America. And that is one of the reasons people end up succeeding. Whereas the UK and other countries can be more admonishing of anybody who fails. So if you have one failure, that's a big mark against you ever getting any other funding or any other company. Americans have got too many scam artists. I think we can all see that from the number of churches they've generated, let alone the number of Donald Trumps it's created. But it is a place where somebody can come up with an idea and get funding to turn that idea into reality. And we get the unicorn nonsense out of it all as well. But it's a culture that doesn't penalise failure so long as you tried. And that is a mindset. And from my experience in the UK, I think that needs to be changed because the emphasis there is so much on not making a mistake in the first place. If you don't make a mistake, you won't innovate.
So I read somewhere that that really a lot of government policy towards business, particularly for new business, is largely related to transactions. So it's, we'll reduce the amount of tax, or we'll give you lower interest loans, or all that sort of stuff. Whereas entrepreneurship largely is relational in nature. So aside from the fact that you need money to try and develop your business, actually lots of businesses don't need that much money in the early days. What people do need is connections. And so someone might have a great idea, but they just don't have access to the right people. And I can sort of relate to that a little bit in that, like you're out and about a lot more than I am. I just sit in my little studio and in the dark and pick my nose. I don't see that. I don't see that.
Charming.
I don't see that many people. This is why I don't see that many people. But actually, the opportunity for me to network would be a good thing, and it's different. So you can go to a conference which costs thousands and thousands of pounds. But actually, if we had more smart business hubs, I think we might have talked about this before. If libraries are in towns were turned into business hubs and stuff, where like minds can get together, more networking actually, I I see as an opportunity for businesses to develop more, and that's perhaps more than money. In fact,
yeah, well, I'm actually more inclined to think the money matters. But in both cases, it's a culture of innovation which the UK used to have. And if you go back and look at political decisions that are made in the past, I mean, for example, the Brits developed the computer and the Americans developed the atomic bomb. And in possibly the second worst trade in human history, the worst trade being the Dutch selling Manhattan to the English, the sale of the computer technology to America meant that America became the center of computer innovation, and the nuclear power thing didn't work out so well. So it's one of those cases where the innovation hasn't been sponsored domestically, and that's one that you have to get that sponsored, and the government sector has the capacity to finance that in a way that the financial sector does not. I'd also go for modifying the financial sector to enable corporates to give bank-type institutions to give loans based on equity positions rather than on debt positions.
So, can it be done in sufficient scale to make a big difference? So, I mean, Google, Microsoft, they're all a lot. Tesla, they're all sort of American companies now making a lot of money, which we're not seeing outside America. So, how come it's happening in the US and it's not happening in the UK? Why haven't we got a Google based in the UK, for example?
Well, part of because information technology was something that as I said, the UK conceded 60 years ago to the Americans, and the Americans have run with it much more. It's had much more impact over time than the nuclear. But it's this focus of being willing to let people fail, funding failure. Which means you've got to have a government sector doing it. And of course, one thing people don't put into their minds when they think about America in this front is the military. Because the military is such a huge part of the American economy. It's financing a lot of this initial innovation, blue sky stuff. All the talk they make about not having government supports and subsidies, et cetera. The American military, apart from where it blows up the rest of the world, is an enormous subsidy to American manufacturing. And it enables these losses to be made. It enables speculative things to be tried out. And even including the internet, for example, of course, which is initially an initiative of DARPA. Defense Advanced Research and Products. I've forgotten what it actually stands for fully, but DARPA. DARPA was the institution that funded the invention of the internet.
So, I mean, we could use it for if we had something similar. It's just an excuse, isn't it, in a way, to spend money on research that has an aim. The aim, unfortunately, is to kill people. But if the aim was to save people, like, for example, in climate change research, and we funded technology like that, then we might get similar spin-offs in other industries.
Yeah, and that's what you need, the capacity to finance. And that's where, again, Mariana Mazzucato's work is extremely important on saying the government provides the finance that enables innovation to occur because the government can afford to finance a failure, whereas a private sector institution can't because it can't create its own money, whereas the government can and does. So it's largely getting that government finance, so things like a investment bank or investment equity company established by the government, designed to lose money, but designed to do it in innovative by sponsoring innovative businesses, enabling the finance sector to take out to have loans that have an equity component to them rather than debt. However, I must mention one of my, I think one of our podcast subscribers heard that and said the last thing she'd want to have is have bankers on their board. Given their personalities and orientations, I can completely agree with that. So there are
way to ruin a good party. Yeah,
good. Lots of white powder, not a lot of white hair in terms of brains.
So, how much of the problem in the UK? I mean, you talked about the fact that we've seen manufacturing decline, and obviously since the Maggie era, I mean, she gave it a very good go, and it's been perpetuated since then. But of course, at the time, a lot of those industries were industries in decline, and I'm just wondering whether. The part of the problem that Britain has is it what it does have are legacy industries it's been stuck with. So British Steel, for example, producing steel in a world which is full of cheaper steel. And if we look at just over the water, Ireland, a country that used to export almost exclusively to the UK, now through the EU, it's growing faster. The Irish are richer. Irish income per capita has risen since 1995 by 192%. The income per capita in the UK has risen by 40%. So what's that? They're like almost four times more than we are. And a large part of that is because they've seen this huge growth in pharmaceuticals and chemicals, which is now more than half of their exports, an industry that just didn't exist in the 1960s. So something's happened there to say, well, okay, here's a new industry that we can really grab hold of and become a dominant player in. And it's brought untold wealth to the Irish. Obviously, they're also headquartered for a lot of companies through lower tax. But I think it is big. But I think the fact they've got this manufacturing base, which has basically come from nowhere, I'm just curious how that's happened, because it has contributed a lot to that country.
Well, a bit like the same sort of thing that China did by encouraging multinationals to set up domestically and then getting technology transferred to domestic companies.
Right.
I'm not sure
a bad plan then, is it really?
I'm not sure the extent to which Ireland's managed to get the technology transfer, and certainly not as much as China has achieved. But yeah, that is part of it. But we can't all do that. We can't all make ourselves bases for foreign multinationals because ultimately they choose one spot and the others lose out in the competition, even though they might have lowered their tax rates to try to encourage them.
But there will be spin-off, even without that declared, you've got to have more than 50% ownership by the Chinese. You still have people working in those companies. They still walk away with a bit of intellectual property.
And they've got the knowledge, and they can go start their own startups and stuff like that. So what you have to do is make that possibility for somebody to decide, I'm learned enough in this company, I've got a good idea that I can take outside that they're not doing internally, but I need finance. And that's where the James Dyson's wife issue comes up. It would be more effective if we had the government providing that money rather than having to rely upon your spouse.
But is that a way of doing it faster? Is it because that whole process of, well, let's get a couple of million James Dysons creating a couple of million inventions, and let's not make them dependent on their wife. Let's make that money available to people. Seems like that's a big ask compared to, well, let's get a few multinationals in here so that they can create a manufacturing base that's not just the service sector, so that we see that manufacturing base grow again in the UK, like we've seen in Ireland, and then you get the spin-off benefits from that because of that that model of complexity you are adding to the industries that are in the midst of that map of industries. So you've got more spin-off benefits.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a question of how much of a market is there for that. Has Ireland already cornered it in that sense?
Well, I have for pharmaceuticals.
And what is the impact?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. This is where partly having an MMT orientation makes life a bit easier. You don't have to imagine the government has to tax in order to spend, so you can afford to drop the tax rates, so long as you then cope with the fallout in terms of excessive creation of government money. We haven't had that in the first place, so to some extent you could allow that to happen without having the negative side effects of cutting taxes means you can't finance government spending. So you can do it that way. But I think in terms of it may be a bit late to try the foreign multinationals approach to building up local industry.
One area we haven't talked about, which is obviously an area that's central to you, but maybe we haven't talked about because we don't see it as that important, is, I mean, we touched on it, is education. I mean, we said you can't teach people to be entrepreneurs, but is there anything that the education sector has to play in all of this? Because actually, you look at a lot of people who are very successsul. They're not necessarily did that well at school.
This is one of the things which I do have opinions on, because in Australia I was...
well, there's other things you don't have opinions on. You've got an opinion on everything. But okay, give us your opinion on education.
We should never have abolished the middle level between tertiary education and trade education. Most countries have had a 3-tiered system, including Australia, where you had technical and further education, which taught sort of machine skills and things of that nature. Colleges of advanced education, which taught things like accounting and nursing, and then universities teaching higher level subjects, physics, chemistry, unfortunately also economics. And what happened with the middle layer was abolished, and we try to make everybody a university graduate, which is more about status than about reality. And what you lost with, you also downgraded the technical education. Now, I haven't seen a German technical education college, but I have been told walking into one of those like walking into a science fiction set, whereas walking into the British equivalent is like walking into a museum. And you have the level of training for machine tool skills, for high precision engineering is much higher in the German education system than it is in the UK. And I think the UK needs to recreate that apprenticeship scheme, the training of people to work as highly skilled workers in technological industries. You need that, and that's partly also where the invention comes from as well.
I mean, does that need to start earlier, in fact, rather than just doing maths and English and a language? Should kids from 13 or 14 be taught how to fix plumbing? And actually it'd be really useful, because my kids are about that age and I seem to be having a bit of trouble with my plumbing at the moment. So the house, not me.
There's actually another little historical quirk in the UK called a man called Sir Cyril Burt. Ever heard of Sir Cyril Burt?
Then the name rings a bell.
Okay, so Cyril Burt invented what's called the 11 plus system, where students were streamed at the age of 11 based on IQ tests into either academic education or trade education. And it turns out, and this is one of these classic things.
It's like the old 11 plus. I did it myself.
So Cyril Burt was a fraud. He based his research on the argument that IQ was inherited rather than acquired. And he did tests of twins who'd been separated at birth, one raised by a parent with an educated background, the other with an ordinary background, and he found, lo and behold, didn't make much difference. It's the IQ that determined the overall result. The trouble is, when people went to take a look at his data, I think he had something like, and I did this back when I was an undergraduate student, I might add, this is why I know about this one. He had, I think, 84 different twins had been separated at birth. First of all, there were not that many twins had been separated at birth in the UK. The data was made up, a large part of it. And secondly, where he did have this data, he was looking at the status of the child based on the education level of the father, when it offered the circumstances of the mother that determined whether they were living in penury or living in plenty or not. So that test was farcical, but partly the idea that you should be taught technical skills as well, trade skills, as well as French and Latin. Yes, it's a vital part of a decent education, and we don't have enough of it.
So if we did that, if we made funding available, that's almost like the key ingredients taken care of right there. The question is it enough? And I've added to that, which you didn't think was that important, thanks, the idea that we need more networking opportunities, because you need to meet the other people who are working in those industries that perhaps you could work together on. But anyway, aside from that, they're the sort of key ingredients.
And plus also a devaluation in the pound.
And a devaluation in the pound. Well, thank God we're getting that one. That one's working.
Definitely.
So we're well on our way, thanks to Brexit. Is it enough? Will Britain prosper then in the coming years, unshackled from Brussels, with all of this opportunity? Will we prosper? Probably not, because the government's not going to do any of those things.
Yeah, and also the finance sector will fight tooth and nail against it, and of course the fact that the finance sector is too big in the first place. So
why will the finance sector? Why will they rally against it? Because I would have thought more income coming into the country is good for the finance sector. They should relish it, shouldn't they? They just won't want to fund it themselves. That's all.
They want to have for them a high valued pound makes more sense than a low valued pound. They'll resist anything that causes devaluation, because that affects the capacity then to buy assets overseas.
Right, but as we grow, as we develop a manufacturing base and grow, the economy grows, then that will correct itself, won't it?
Well, I mean, I'm a bit skeptical about the possibility of it happening in the first place, given the ecological environment we're in as well.
After all of this,
we had
all this. We had a plan, and now you're saying it's not going to happen.
Yeah, afraid so.
Well, it's an interesting discussion anyway. Well, you've got to have some hope, haven't you? Otherwise, what is the hope for the UK's future? You've got to go in one direction. You've got to have a roadmap, surely. Yeah,
and it basically means reverse direction. Get away from focusing everything on the finance sector and growing the so-called service sector. Start looking at building up your manufacturing base again, because whatever happens in the future with the climate change, you're going to need it in that situation. It's something which, you can't... you can't bond your way out of an environmental crisis. You've got to manufacture and industrialize your way out of it if you're going to get out of it at all. So,
well, and there it is. There's the answer staring in the face, isn't it? That we just need to, because we have played in the energy sector. The obvious, companies like BP are big multinationals, and they started their life as British companies. There's an opportunity for us to develop that whole new sector. And look, and if you can make alternative energy work in Scotland, for example, you can make it work anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and you've also got the other issue that a lot of our listeners are into, also the nuclear and thorium end of the world, which is still nobody's actually cracked that one yet. So that's another obvious area to throw government money at, where lots of them will lose. Maybe one of them will succeed, and if that's the case, it succeeds, then there's a positive out of the environmental crisis coming our way.
Right. And someone somewhere will, there will be inventions associated with all of this. So someone will invent a special nut, for example, that will make wind power stations generate 10% more energy from their sails just by the shape of the nut. There's going to be tiny stuff like that will come out of the next James Dyson.
Let's hope so.
And it could well be British. Should we play the national anthem as we finish this week's edition? We'll catch you again very soon. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, mate. Bye.
And next time, should central banks take back control of the money supply? These days, most money is actually created by commercial banks, and that means the money supply is up and down depending on the demand for credit. So, should central banks take back more control? And if so, how? That's next time on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. See you then. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.